Tonight on Ukraine Today, peace efforts. What did American and Ukrainian negotiators agree on during their meeting in Miami? The Kremlin's real intentions. Putin confirmed his commitment to his original war goals in Ukraine and his refusal to compromise. Money for Ukraine. What options are being discussed by the European Commission and what is the United Kingdom proposing? A historic mistake, the anniversary of a document that showed the true value of deals with Russia and the so-called security guarantees from major powers. All that and more, right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and let's move to the news. We begin with the situation on the front line. Street fighting continues in Pokrovsk, and reports are coming in about a critical situation in Mirnograd. More on what's happening on the battlefield in the story.
Over 50 fuel and military-industrial infrastructure facilities in Russia have been struck by Ukrainian defense forces this autumn, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces. Journalists have obtained satellite images that show the scale of the Ukrainian Armed Forces' autumn strikes, confirming the military's reports.
We have started producing more advanced drones, more sophisticated missiles. In other words, we now have more potent weapons, with which we can carry out strategic airstrikes against the Russian Federation.
These raids on the occupiers are not coming to an end. On the night of December 4th, Ukrainian drones attacked targets in the city of Nevinomysk, according to the governor of Stavropol Krai, Vladimir Vladimirov. According to data from a Ukrainian monitoring telegram channel, the chemical plant Nevinomysky Azot was hit. Earlier this year, the plant had already been attacked by drones twice, on July 25th and June 14th. Meanwhile, the satellite city of Pokrovsk, Mirnograd, has been almost completely destroyed. This is being reported by the Western press. The occupiers are using aerial bombs weighing up to 500 kilograms, drones and artillery, trying to wipe the city off the face of the earth.
Everything that was in that direction is now attacking the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd-Kostiantynivka conglomeration. This is what is called a difficult situation. Heavy fighting is taking place there.
Naturally, the current situation remains very challenging in the Pokrovsk direction as well at this time.
The Russians have partially infiltrated Pokrovsk. We control the northern part of Pokrovsk along the railway. The central and southern parts of the region are currently not controlled by the Russian armed forces, specifically the Russian army. There are approximately several hundred Russian individuals, let's say saboteurs, operating within those areas, and their counter-sabotage operations and, clearing operation are underway in the middle of the city.
In the Kupiansk direction, the enemy continues to receive retaliatory strikes from the armed forces of Ukraine.
The people who slipped into Kupiansk, just like in Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, are not registered in the logbook at the entrance. They are not recorded. Therefore, we can only roughly estimate how many people are there based on indirect signs, including radio intercepts of their communications, because they came in. They didn't just hide somewhere in a basement. They're there, they receive, or they make contact, or someone contacts them. According to the detailed analysis of radio intercepts conducted by our highly capable intelligence, there are still several dozen dangerous saboteurs remaining within the strategic city of Kupiansk, posing a significant threat. And they continue to be searched for, found, and neutralized.
At this time, the Russian dictator Putin stated that he would capture the Donetsk and Luhansk regions no matter what, and added that for 8 years he had watched as the self-proclaimed DNR and LNR were allegedly being destroyed.
Well, and the Russians won't feel any shame. And for those people in Europe or America who believed, or pretended to believe, that we had been bombing Donbass for 8 years, well, at the very least, it would be awkward. In fact, they would just start laughing at the United Nations. How exactly has Ukraine been bombing for 8 years, and where were they supposedly bombing?
But the ones who are truly destroying the temporarily occupied territories and their population are the Russians. Some Ukrainian children, deported from the temporarily occupied territories, are being sent by the aggressor country to military camps in North Korea. This was stated by Ekaterina Rashevskaya, an expert from the Regional Center for Human Rights, during hearings in the US Senate. At this point, 165 military camps have been documented where Ukrainian children are being militarized and Russified.
During the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 1,240 occupiers killed and wounded. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, that's already 1,178,600 10 invaders. Also, in the last day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 1 Russian armored fighting vehicle, 34 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy military equipment. A new Russian war crime has been confirmed. The occupiers executed a Ukrainian prisoner of war in the Donetsk region. This is reported by Deep State. According to analysts, the defender walked out of a shelter unarmed with his hands raised, but the invaders killed him. Air Defense Forces shot down 80 of 137 drones Russia launched last night at the north, south, east and center of Ukraine. There were hits from 57 strike UAVs at 13 locations. Because of damage to energy infrastructure, consumers in Vinnytsia, Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk and Odessa regions remain without electricity. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, Russians killed a 12-year-old child and 3 more people were wounded. Several private houses were destroyed. Ukrainian drones attacked oil refineries in Syzran in Samara region and in Saratov region. There was also a strike on a seaport of Temryuk in the Krasnodar region. Russia's defense ministry reported the downing of 42 drones over Russia and temporarily occupied Ukrainian Crimea. And in Chechnya, air defense worked especially effectively. A Russian interceptor missile hit the Grozny city business center. A meeting between American and Ukrainian negotiators took place in Miami. The topic was ways to end Russia's war. According to the head of the Ukrainian delegation, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov, the side had a meaningful discussion.
Our task now is to get full information about what was said in Russia, about any new excuses that Putin has found to drag this war on and to pressure Ukraine, to pressure all of us, our independence. Ukraine is ready for any possible scenario, and of course we will keep working as constructively as possible with all our partners so that peace can finally come, and so that it is a just peace. Only a just peace means real security. And we fully understand that for this, partner support is needed now and will be needed further.
Meanwhile, the so-called president of Russia, Putin, confirmed his commitment to his original war goals in Ukraine and his refusal to compromise. This is stated in a new report from the Institute for the Study of War. Analysts reviewed the dictator's interview with the English-language magazine India Today. The war criminal said Russia will end the war in Ukraine only when it reaches the goals set at the start of the so-called special military operation. According to Putin, Kyiv should understand that the best way to end the war is to accept the settlement Russia tried to impose on Ukraine in 2022. I'd call it a demand for capitulation. And what was Putin doing in India in the first place? The dictator arrived there with a begging hand. He's trying to convince Prime Minister Modi to buy more Russian oil and to return to the dead-end fifth-generation fighter jet project. Here are the details.
From Russian dictator to pathetic distributor. Things are going so badly for the Kremlin that now Putin himself is traveling around trying to persuade others to buy Russian oil. For the first time since the start of the full-scale war, the bunker dweller is heading to India. The 2-day state visit is supposedly timed to coincide with the Russia-India Business Forum. However, in reality, Putin is rushing to Prime Minister Modi to secure New Delhi's support regarding future oil supplies.
Our relations with India have still a special character.
And that's because the volume of trade between India and Russia has grown several times over the past 5 years. In March 2025, it reached almost $69 billion. Whereas in 2020, this figure was just a little over $8 billion. Only China buys more from Russia.
If India relinquishes its vital energy resources, it will undoubtedly suffer significant losses and considerable detrimental consequences.
But when choosing between the West, the US and Russia, the clear advantage is definitely not on the side of the bunker dweller. As a result, after the sanctions were imposed, Indian oil refineries have gradually started to turn away from the Kremlin's black gold.
India has reduced its purchases of Russian oil to 600,000 private companies. For example, Reliance Industries with its oil refining facilities in Jamnagar, a major oil refining complex, they announced in November, this is the same company owned by Mukesh Ambani. They announced that they are sharply reducing their purchases of Russian oil.
Under these circumstances, Putin will have nothing to finance the war in Ukraine with, which means the bunker dweller desperately needs to reach an agreement with New Delhi to continue supplies. That's why Vladimir Vladimirovich promises to come in person and, in addition to oil, offer the President of India a lucrative arms deal.
India is interested in purchasing and servicing Su-57 fighter jets and the advanced S-500 missile defense system with Russia.
The Russian Federal Service for Military Technical Cooperation immediately reported enthusiastically they are ready to supply the latest Su-jets to India, and New Delhi is allegedly extremely interested in acquiring them.
The point is to develop the aviation industry in India, which is striving to possess the latest combat systems, including fifth-generation aircraft.
But here's the problem. The much-hyped Su-57, so heavily promoted by the Kremlin, despite all the Russian propaganda's claims about its invincibility and innovative design, is something the Indians don't need at all.
Well, here's the situation. The Indians themselves withdrew from the Su-57 project. They were part of this project, and since the project was moving slowly and there was no real progress, the Indians pulled out.
But Russian air defense systems are of much greater interest to the Indians. They would gladly buy the S-400 from the Kremlin, and even the S-500 systems. But here's the hitch. Putin doesn't have enough of them for himself. The Russian military-industrial complex can't keep up with Ukrainian drones and artillery. As a result, Russia can only promise weapons on paper, and even then, only with Putin's familiar guarantees.
India will insist on buying the S-400 and S-500. Although in principle, many of Russia's foreign contracts, including those with Iran, as you know, and with India as well, have still not been fulfilled because Russia is technically unable to carry out these export contracts, since in fact its entire military-industrial complex is fully engaged in the war against Ukraine.
In reality, analysts explain, Putin has nothing to offer India. That's why the bunker dweller himself is rushing to New Delhi, to try, as they say in Russia, to get by on charisma alone. Whether it will work out or not will become clear by the end of this week.
The people of a vast and diverse country like India, believe me, will be watching very closely and with great interest the significant political decisions made by their esteemed leadership.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now is the time to subscribe to the channel, like this video and share it. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. The United Kingdom is ready to transfer more than $10 billion of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. The Times reports this. According to the publication, the government considers Russia a threat to the people, security and prosperity of the United Kingdom, and calls on partners to bypass Belgium's veto and unlock the funds. The EU has settled on how to continue financing Ukraine. The European Commission announced two possible options. Plan a reparations loan backed by frozen Russian assets. But as a reminder, Belgium is strongly against this idea. It even reached the point where Brussels was suspected of misusing Kremlin-linked money. But that's another story. So, Plan B, a loan funded directly from the EU budget. More in the story.
The European Commission has prepared two options for providing financial support to Ukraine in 2026 to 2027, a euro loan or a reparations credit funded by the frozen assets of the Russian Central Bank, totaling 165 billion euros.
This will provide Ukraine with the means for self-defense and to advance peace negotiations from a position of strength. We are proposing solutions that will help cover Ukraine's financial needs for the next 2 years, support its state budget, and strengthen its defense industry. We propose to cover 2/3 of Ukraine's financial needs for the next 2 years.
According to Politico, the loan of 165 billion is part of an even larger EU financial package for Ukraine, totaling 210 billion. 115 will go to Ukraine's defense industry, 50 will cover Ukraine's budgetary needs, and 45 will be used to repay the loan that the G7 countries provided to Ukraine in 2024.
And the question is very simple. Either Europe, which wants to defend its own agency, pays its own money to help Ukraine, or they try to use someone else's money, which of course is also quite pragmatic on the part of the European Union. They have a large resource, yes, about $300 billion in frozen assets, and with this, they want to help their own security without spending their own money.
But the European Commission barely had time to present its options to the public before Belgium threw a wrench in the works.
How will Belgium hand Putin an unexpected victory? Prime Minister Bart De Wever is blocking the confiscation of Moscow's frozen funds intended to help Ukraine. Will anyone be able to change his mind?
The head of the Belgian government has fallen for Putin's intimidation and blackmail. Moreover, Belgian State Secretary Chamberlain has started openly voicing pro-Russian narratives, claiming that the defeat of the aggressor who started the war is undesirable.
Frozen assets will have to be returned to the Kremlin after the war. Eventually, this war will end. But Russia will never lose this war. It's even undesirable for a country with nuclear weapons to lose a war and become completely unstable. That is not in our interests.
Meanwhile, in the Kremlin, they are undoubtedly clapping their hands with glee and enthusiastically popping bottles of champagne when they observe what is currently happening inside the European Union. Now the time has come when Putin doesn't even need to directly bribe a specific leader or two in the European Union. For example, right now we're talking specifically about Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. But in fact, these metastases are starting to spread to other countries as well.
Meanwhile, as debates rage within the EU, the US has come up with its own plans for the frozen assets in Europe. Initially, in the original version of the American peace plan authored by Dmitriev and Witkoff, Washington wanted to invest part of the money into a US-led fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Europe categorically refused, and the White House then proposed, after the signing of a peace agreement, to simply return all the money to Russia.
Without a collective decision, without a collectively strong, let's say, a decisive decision regarding the reparations loan, Europe at this particular moment cannot defend its own agency. That is why this is a Rubicon for Europe, a bifurcation point. The decision regarding the reparations loan for Ukraine, the decision on whether it is possible to help Ukraine continue to defend itself against the Russian Federation, is essentially a matter of survival for the European Union.
In Russia, there was an explosion on a section of the Druzhba pipeline, through which Russian oil still flows to several European countries. Meanwhile, huge volumes of Russian oil have accumulated at sea due to marketing problems. Russia's oil and gas revenues have dropped significantly. What does this mean to the Kremlin, and how could it affect Russia's war against Ukraine?
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Once again, the Druzhba oil pipeline has exploded on Russian territory. This was reported to several Ukrainian media outlets by sources in the main intelligence directorate, HUR. The attack on the oil pipeline took place near the settlement of Kazinskie Veselki, on the Taganrog-Lipetsk section of the pipeline.
According to the sources, explosives with remote detonation and additional flammable mixtures were used to achieve greater combustion.
The Druzhba oil pipeline is used by Russia to transport oil to countries in Eastern and Central Europe. This is far from the first strike on the Druzhba pipeline. Back on August 13th, Hungary accused Ukraine of a drone attack on a Druzhba pipeline distribution station in the Bryansk region. At that time, a fire broke out at the facility, which is involved in supplying Russia's military-industrial complex.
President Zelensky openly threatened Hungary. He admitted that they are targeting the Druzhba pipeline because we do not support their accession to the EU. This shows that the Hungarians made the right decision.
On August 18th, Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó stated that Ukraine had allegedly attacked the pipeline again. Oil supplies to Hungary were only restored a day later. And already on August 22nd, Hungary announced a third Ukrainian attack on the Druzhba pipeline. As a result, oil supplies from Russia were once again halted.
Strikes on the Russian oil industry are the most effective way to force Russia into real negotiations and to end the war. At the same time, both the resilient Ukrainians themselves, their dedicated Ukrainian special services, particularly the highly effective SBU, and their formidable drone forces are actively operating, consistently and effectively striking crucial Russian targets. The extensive oil infrastructure includes, in particular, the vital Druzhba pipeline and significant oil transfer terminals.
Additionally, as Bloomberg reports, Ukraine carried out a record number of strikes on Russian oil refineries in November. Over the course of the month, the Ukrainian armed forces struck Russian oil refineries at least 14 times, more than ever before. In addition, there were 4 recorded attacks on oil infrastructure in Black Sea ports. This led to shipment delays in Novorossiysk. According to analysts, due to damage to facilities, Russia's average daily oil refining has dropped to about 5 million barrels, and it could fall even further. But that's not all. Do you remember the recent special operation by the SBU to blow up 2 tankers from Russia's shadow fleet? At that time, the upgraded Sea Baby maritime drones were successfully used against the ships. These drones can cover long distances and are equipped with reinforced warheads. During the attack, the vessels were heading empty to the port of Novorossiysk for loading. Both tankers suffered critical damage after being hit by the drones and have effectively been taken out of service, which will undoubtedly deal a significant blow to the transportation of Russian oil.
In fact, all vessels involved in Russia's shadow fleet are operating outside the law. Now, the second point, the vessels involved in Russia's shadow fleet directly ensure the inflow of funds into the Russian budget from the sale of sanctioned oil. These funds are also allocated to the war against Ukraine. Thus, every ship in the shadow fleet is involved in the war against Ukraine, thereby losing its civilian status. This can be compared to Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian oil refineries. At first glance, an oil refinery seems like a civilian facility, but in reality it is entirely and completely engaged in the machinery of war. The same goes for tankers. Ukraine is expanding the range of targets it will attack in the near future in the Black Sea, and this list includes tankers from Russia's shadow fleet.
The media report that after the United States imposed large-scale sanctions against Russian oil in October, Russian oil companies Lukoil and Rosneft, as well as their 34 subsidiaries, came under sanctions from Washington and London amid Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine. Now it is becoming increasingly difficult to find buyers for the oil, and more oil is accumulating on tankers from its shadow fleet at sea.
Of course, the sanctions also play a certain role, but I think it's specifically the strikes on the oil infrastructure. That is the most important element in achieving the final result. At the same time, it should be understood that all of this is very painful for Russia. The main part of the income that Russia receives comes specifically from oil. The more oil they sell, the more money they have. The less they sell, the less money they have. Moreover, it's important to note that under sanctions, Russia is often forced to sell oil at a significant discount, that is, with large price reductions, which again also affects the decrease in their revenues. And they need a huge amount of money to continue waging the war.
Tankers are essentially being used as floating storage, which has led to a sharp increase in their number at sea. According to Bloomberg, the volume of oil in tankers at sea has increased by 1/5 over 3 months. It is also reported that about 180 million barrels of oil have been accumulated. The main reason is the imposition of sanctions, which complicate the sale of Rosneft's oil and led to increased transportation times and delays at the destination ports. The accumulation of oil in tankers could lead to lower prices and hit Russia's revenues, despite the projected growth in export income of energy resources in the 2025 budget. According to Reuters, Russia's oil and gas revenues in November plummeted by 1/3. According to the agency, oil and gas revenues in the Russian budget fell by about 35%, amounting to around 520 billion rubles. This is one of the lowest figures in recent months.
In fact, I think that if effective strikes on the Russian oil industry had started not now, but back in 2022, then perhaps the situation would be different now, everywhere, from the front lines to Russia's willingness to enter into any agreements. But in any case, the fact that these strikes are continuing now and that the Russian oil industry is being restricted, all of this will inevitably have an effect. The question is, when? The question again is, how will Russia counteract this? But as for whether there will be an effect, I don't think anyone really doubts that. And
by the way, over there in Russia, are you not getting too relaxed? The Russian oil network, as the main source of income for the aggressor state and the funding of its military-industrial complex, will continue to explode and burn as long as Russia does not stop its attempts to attack Ukraine.
Today is the anniversary of a document that showed the true value of agreements with Russia and of security guarantees from major powers. We're talking about the Budapest Memorandum. On December 5th, 1994, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for security guarantees from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia. Among other things, Ukraine was promised respect for its territorial integrity and protection in case of aggression. 20 years later, Russia attacked Ukraine and no one prevented the aggressor from doing it. And today is also International Volunteer Day. A huge thank you to everyone who does everything possible and even what seems impossible. Thank you to all who help bring our victory closer. Happy Volunteer Day to everyone involved. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. See you next time.